now I'm ready to move on to actually polishing the aggregate, because the first part of this process is we're focusing on damage removal, maintaining the footprint, and getting the quartz polished up to the factory polish. Now, that doesn't mean our polymer will get up to the factory, will be polished at the factory polish, but our goal is to target the aggregate first, and that's what we're doing. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to use this grinder here. I usually turn it down to 1 to seat the polishing pad. So you take one of your leather pads at this point. Now that we've got the damage out, we've got a nice even finish. It's blended well into the factory. So now we can actually polish up our actual aggregate now. In this case, it's a very fine quartz. On Caesar stone, I use 800 grit. As you can see, this is a piece of Caesar stone that we are working on here. And you gotta look and see where I'm at again here. So I'm going to go ahead and set this pad down. I want to center up my backer on here. You really want it to be centered because these are rotating at speed, and if they're lopsided, then it's going to throw everything off. So when we're doing this here, I'm going to do 2 sprigs of water. I'm going to grab my 800 grit compound, which is this one right here. I'll just give it a little shake, or 8,000 grit compound, I'm sorry. Just give my 8,000 grit compound a little shake here. And we don't need much. You just need a little bit here. A little bit. Not full sprig, just a little bit. Just dampen it. And then what you want to do is just kind of move this around in a circle here until you can create a paste. And the water will evaporate. Remember, we're using water here. There's no chemicals in these compounds at all. No fluoric acid, no oxalic acids, no densifier. There's nothing in this stuff except it is a true engineered mechanical polish. They were designed to work on anything a grade 3 to a grade 10 on the Mohs scale. So we've got a nice paste here. It's kind of sticky, which is perfect. So I have my machine set on 1. I'm going to seat my pad. Now my pad is seated. I'm going to turn this up to between 4,500 and 5,500 RPM is the maximum you want to go. I usually like to run it around 4,500 RPM. And then you want to make sure you check it regularly with the back of your hand and make sure you're not getting that material too hot. So let me just turn this up here. So now basically I've picked up the compound, so I'm going to give it another sprig of water. This helps keep it cool, but it also allows compound to release from your pad so that you can keep your polish moving across the surface as you're working it. Very warm. So as I'm polishing the surface of the material, what I'm looking for, and I'm drawing the light through it, is I'm looking for a very consistent finish. If I have any place that looks like a fog, looks slightly gray, anything like that, well then I simply want to focus more on that, because what that's telling you is that your quartz, or your aggregate, quartz in this case, the aggregate is not polished up to the factory polish yet. So we want to keep going until all that fog is gone. Once that fog is gone, then we can then address our texture, and then we'll bring the finish back on our polymer. So I'm going to add a little more 8,000 grit compound here. Just because I was using a new pad, they absorb compound when they're new until they become fully seasoned. Once they're fully seasoned, all you should have to do is just add water, and the pad will auto-release the compound for you, and you can just proceed with the processes. Once again, about 2 sprigs of water there, 2 little sprays, make a paste, just like we did before. and it's a little bit thin right now. You can see it. If you can see like bubbles or watery, if it looks kind of watery, then that's too thin. We just want to wait till it gets kind of like a paste, similar to like yogurt, toothpaste, you know, somewhere on there. Once we've achieved that, then we'll just go ahead and switch it on. Now that I've gotten my quartz polished up very nicely, once you set up your texture though, that's really going to tell you, because once you set up your texture, you want to look across the surface, and anything that isn't quite polished up at that point will stand out. All we need to do after that, if we do have a section or a point that isn't all the way polished up, it looks like a fog on the surface or silvery or anything like that, we want to go back to our leather pad, work that area, and then we can go back to the velvet touch pad in the compound and then correct the polymer. And you can do that back and forth until that issue disappears. So I'm going to go ahead and take this pad here, my 75mm velvet touch pad. But I'm going to show you right now, you can see that the polish now is beautiful, very consistent across the board here. It's just that you can see it looks darker than the other, and that's because we don't have any texture in there. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and introduce some texture into this, and then we'll bring up our polymer. So 75mm velvet touch pad. And just like we did before, I'm going to use a 3000 grit compound this time. Once you've put a polish on your quartz then becomes scratch resistant, and it allows us then to drop to a coarser compound, and that way we can now use the velvet touch pad, which is designed with little fingers, and it will polish around all of the aggregate and polish out the polymer. By polishing out the polymer, that is how we gain our texture. The nice thing about this process is that it's very controllable. So you just periodically check it, and once you can see that the flat spot's gone, then all you need to do then is just get that final buff or polish on your polymer, and you're finished. So let's just go ahead and proceed with that. Same thing again. We're just going to do 2 sprigs of water. We're going to shake up our 3000 grit compound here. Then I'm going to just put a little bit on there, about 2 pinches if you will, something of that nature. Typically texturing process, it depends on the polymer that they use, how hard it is, all of these variables. So, you know, once again, that will vary as well. The difference here with this is, instead of, you know, moving it around in a circle like we do with these pads, we recommend that you pat them, because if you go in a circle, those fingers have a tendency to kind of pick up the compound, and you don't get as much on the surface where you need it to be. So as you see, as I'm patting this, I'm creating a nice even little coating here of the compound on the surface. Once I get it all moved around, then I'm just simply going to turn on my machine, and we're just going to now just polish it until that flat spot is gone. You can see it's getting a little dry, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water. You don't have to add a whole bunch, because eventually the velvet touch pad will absorb moisture and it'll hold it in there. So you'll get to a point where you don't really need to add much water at all. But I'm just going to give this here probably, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, 8 minutes, whatever, and then I'll evaluate the texture. This is going really fast like this actually will defeat the purpose. The more consistent you are and more purposeful, the better and faster actually the whole process will take. By moving fast across the surface, it doesn't allow the product time to actually work. So if you'll give it time to work, then it will actually work faster than not allowing it time to work. I'm just kind of looking, you'll see that it creates waves in the surface, and I like to keep them spaced about 1/8 of an inch. That way I know I'm getting very good consistent overlap, very good consistent application of the abrasive, and I know that my process is actually working faster. So now what I want to do is check my texture. You could clean the entire surface, but ultimately that's a waste of product and compound. So what I found works quite well is just simply take and pull a rag or something through the area where you've been working, leave the rest of the compound, and then what I do is I want to get down. Once again, I could put my flashlight on here so I can get the light shining across it. You can, if you have it installed in a kitchen, you can stand way back and look and see if the flat spot is gone. All of those things you can do. In this case, since I have it, I'm going to go ahead and just pick this thing up and take a look at it and look at and see if my flat spot is gone yet. It is not quite gone yet, although I can see that the texture is starting to come in. So I just have to keep going with some of this until I got all my texture in there. Once again, I'm just going to check this and see where my texture is at. And I believe our texture is there. So I'm going to just go ahead and clean this up really fast and take a look at it. So now I'm looking at the surface. Texture looks really good, but I can see that I still have a little bit of fog in here. As I told you before, sometimes after you texture it, things will come out that you hadn't seen before. So what I'm going to simply do is I'm just going to go over that again with this machine here, because obviously the fog is caused by the aggregate. It's not deal with the polymer. The polymer looks beautiful actually. So I'm just going to go ahead and go over that again with a little bit more 8000 with this here, just to kind of fine tune everything, and believe we'll be just about done. Once again, I'm adding more compound because it's a new pad and it'll take a little bit of time before this pad becomes fully seasoned. So now that I've gotten my texture and everything done there, what I want to do is you can take your Velvet Touch pad to a sink, because this we used a 3000 grit compound with it. Normally you want to rinse this out really well. Just take it to a sink and rinse it out. I'm going to just go ahead and soak this thing down with some water. Try to get that excess 3000 out of there, because now I want to deal with the finish on here for the polymer on this engineered stone, which in Caesar Stone's case, I found that the finish, unless it's their Concetto series, which is, then it would be a 14,000, but on their standard series of materials, I found that the 8000 grit compound across the board works great for all of the different applications. So we've just rinsed this out. I'm going to once again add a little bit more 8000 grit compound here to the surface, so that I can straighten out the polymer, and this will actually put a factory polish now on our polymer, and we will be done at that point. 1, 2 sprigs of water, and we just want to pat this around just exactly like we did before. If it's a little bit dry, just go ahead and add a little bit more water. That's fine. And we're just going to tap this around. So what this will do is this will correct the distortions in the polymer. And what I mean by that is when you look at the polymer and you're polishing, you're going to see white marks and you'll see streaks and things like that that are in the polymer itself. This process will take those out as well as bring up the finish to match our factory finish. So let's just go ahead and go through here. This actually doesn't take very long, but and I'm just kind of going a little bit over into the factory side just for blending purposes. Alright, well, let's clean this up and see how we did. Wiping it down, it feels exactly the same. You can always tell how well you did too by when you clean it up, how it feels as you get it all cleaned up. Absolutely no transition zone. The light, clarity, 100%.